not reflect that of the station's board, management, staff, or underwriters.
Episode of the Commissioner's Corner, brought to you by the Virgin Islands Department of Education. I am your host, Commissioner Dr. Dion Wells Hedrington, and I'm pleased to launch this platform as a direct link between our audience, our stakeholders, and the Virgin Islands Department of Education. At the department, we are transforming today's learners into tomorrow's leaders. And so with that being said, I am excited to have with me today the gatekeepers of our district. I have with me Dr. Erisilda Herman, Atlee Herman of the St. Croix District. Welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
And hailing from the St. Thomas St. John District, Insula Superintendent Dr. Stefan Jurgen. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I just want to mention to the audience that we will be live every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. You can catch us on 93.1 FM or on Facebook. So thank you for joining us today. And we're going to jump right into our conversation because as educators, we get very excited when we talk about students and student outcomes. And each of us share the same vision of wanting the best possible pathway for every single child who enters our public education system. And we say we are public school proud.
That's right.
That's right. So Superintendent Herman, we're going to start with you. Tell me a little bit about the school improvement planning process and why we're engaging in that with our schools.
So the school improvement planning process, every school has a team, administrator and teachers, parents, students, who delve into the data and create what they see to be the best steps to improve student outcomes. We need that for each school because each school has a different population. And so it helps us to see what would serve them best and what can be done or implemented to kind of improve the whole child.
Excellent. So, Dr. Jurgen, you're following that same trajectory. But what I want you to educate the public on is how important is the data and using the data to drive your school improvement planning process?
The data is extremely important because it tells a story. Sometimes you think that children are doing well, but the proof should come out in the pudding, right? And so when we're able to assess them, we're able to look at how the child is actually doing, and actually we're able to vet our programs that we're using to see is this the best tool to help this child with this particular problem. So the reviewing of the data is very, very important, and it really starts the process for the school improvement teams to be able to look at the data closely and share it with all stakeholders and identify these are some problem areas and these are some things that we need to address and these are some things that we need to address right now.
Excellent. So when we talk about data, because we were in the Senate yesterday, and we had the opportunity to share the data with our senators and with the public. And one of the questions that always is looming over everyone's head is the low performance of our students when it comes to the standardized assessment. We are in the season of accountability, and that means that schools will be looked at from several different points. So when you talk about student data, Dr. Herman, what is it that the district is doing to support the people who are in the trenches and actually have to be the one to make the change?
So one of the key things that we have, or one of our tools, is a data dashboard. And we procured licenses that go all the way down to the teacher level. So schools, administrators, counselors, they have access to the data dashboard. The district data teams conducts data chats. Weekly, we send reports to the schools, whether it's attendance, because student attendance counts, what's happening with the mid-year or early year iReady. So we look at, from the district level, we support that. And then we also host data chats with the schools to walk through what are you seeing and how can we support you.
I know as a former principal, one of the things that I did with my students was share the data with them, because we find that when students know where they are, then they can set benchmarks for themselves as well. So is that kind of work still happening in our schools, Dr. Jurgen?
Commissioner, I always say that once a child reaches 4th grade, that child is able to sit and look at where they are and compare themselves to everyone else in the class, in the grade, in the school, and test and see how they're performing. And no child wants to come to school and wants to fail and wants to not do well. And so that gives you an inkling of, this is where I am. Maybe I'm not satisfied with where I am, but there's something that you can do about it so that you can improve. So it's very important. And not only do we share the information with our teachers, our principals, our parents, but students must be part of the owning process of looking at the data and seeing if they're comfortable with it and what they can do to really, really make improvements.
So part of what we did when we came together as a group was to put back some site-based management into our schools. And we decided to do that because principals know what their school needs are best. And so the principals have established their school teams, they've looked at the data, they've written their school improvement plans that have projected targets that now you superintendents have the ability to hold schools accountable for. And one of the things, community, that you have to understand is the role of the principal. The principal has oversight over the schools. The districts support the principals, and the commissioner state level supports the district. So in essence, we needed to give them a little bit more autonomy to make decisions that are relevant to the data for their particular schools. So Dr. Herman, you're a data-driven leader, hands down. What has the data been showing you?
So honestly, we are not where we need to be, but it's the baseline. And the reason why I say it's the baseline is because we've been through testing cycles, but this is our largest testing cycle where the students have been in person. And so what it's telling me is, historically, one, we need to tighten up on writing in the St. Croix district. That has been our lowest domain. In mathematics, it varies from grade level to grade level, but what we see is that our students can solve a standard problem. But when there's multi-step problems or word problems, that's where the disconnect comes in, where they have to apply that learning, where it's not just addition straight. You add, you multiply, and you divide in a problem. So really, we have done the shift in looking at what are the key things that we need to do differently for our grade levels, and then what do we kind of need to start to introduce earlier in schools. So the data is telling a story of there's a lot of work to do, but there's progress that has been made.
Excellent. And so one of the things that I want to share with the community is that when we made the shift to the Smarter Balanced Assessment, it was a complete shift. Even in
it was
the
a
way
shock.
It was
It
a
was a
shock.
shock, not
It
a
was a
shift.
shock. It was a shock. And I remember at the time, I was the Insula superintendent, and Dr. Jurgen, you were an administrator at the time. And I remember us taking the 3rd grade assessment. I don't know if you remember. And when we were introduced to the types of questions that the students were being asked of on that assessment, it was a shock for us. And that requires us changing even the way that we assess our students. So in terms of that shift that needed to happen, Dr. Jurgen, how do you feel that your teachers in your respective district have embraced the changes that need to occur when we teach and the way we assess?
First, I just want to address the shift that occurred with the presence of Smarter Balance, right? Like before, under ITBS, right? A student might have to read a paragraph and then just, derive an answer from the paragraph that's right there glaring. You could go on the 3rd line and see.
Bubble in.
But it's not that easy now. So in Smarter Balance today, you might have where a child is given 3 different texts, and they might be asked to compare and contrast or identify the area that's most critical, and then identify the source, right? That's a little more complex when you're asking for students
Very.
to look through and synthesize and then compare and also contrast. And so one of the things we've had to do is to shore up our reading in our schools. It's not the same length of, it's no longer a small paragraph. It might be 3 pages. And so students have to have the stamina to be able to, use their metacognition to keep themselves alert, to continue reading through the passage and looking for key points or hints that could get them to derive at an answer. So the answer might not be as glaring. You might have to go and look for it, and there might be like innuendos or suggestions that you also have to be aware of.
And another thing that was different for our children was the type of assessment. They moved from paper pencil to now computer-based.
Yes.
And so
And our children struggle with that.
Oh, definitely struggle because as adults, when we have to make a shift, we struggle.
Correct.
So we expected to see some challenges in that area as well. But Dr. Herman, you said something very important that I need you to expound on, that this year is our baseline year. Why did we take that posture?
So it's so funny because we know that during the pandemic, after the hurricanes, the test that was given was a paper pencil test with the students receiving the grade level prior. So the 6th graders took the 5th grade test. Then after that, the next test that we did was over the pandemic years. And the students were virtual. So we're not sure of really the validity of who did it, how well they did it. And so now last year, 22-23, that was our in-person testing. So students were in person, in a control setting. And so we're using that as the baseline because we know, and in the past 3 years, last year had the largest population of students tested for me in the St. Croix district because they were in person. And so we're using that as a baseline because of the control setting and the number of students. And we are going nowhere but up from here.
So we know as former educators ourselves that we benefit from consistent professional development.
Yes.
And we've been blessed to have federal dollars in the territory. Dr. Jorgen, tell me some of what you've used your federal funding for to assist the teachers and their instructional work within the classroom.
Well, there are a host of areas that we felt our teachers needed to really, really get some more practice in. The science of reading comes to mind first because not everyone understands the depth that goes into teaching a child how to read.
So can you pause there? What actually is the science of reading? Because we have to remember that our audience may not know the terminologies we use as educators. And so can you break that down? Because it's very important what you're about to mention.
So when we talk about the science of reading, we're looking at the philosophy and the theory and marking those things that help a child read, right? And so it doesn't just all come at once, but we have to take some system where it comes from your sight words and you're using that. And it's really, really a whole charge that you have instead of just looking at words and reading them. And so the comprehension also comes in to another world where, it really requires a lot of practice and effort, but the teacher must know the rudimentary skills to pass on to the children, right? And so when we talk about the science of reading to the root and to the core, it really is done in such a way so that we can make sure that we look at where children are and where we need to take them to where they need to be.
Taking it back to phonics and
right.
graphemes and
The very basics.
and even to how you form your mouth to pronounce words.
Exactly.
So to add to that, so it's really teaching the teachers how do you get the students from the base of reading to reading to the comprehension piece.
And that's so funny because at Christmas time, my 7-year-old granddaughter submitted her Christmas list. And it was phonetically written. But I could decipher what she was saying, even though the words were not spelled right. And that's the beginning of the writing process. That's the beginning of the spelling and the language process. And I think that over the years, we've strayed away from some of the old basic things that we knew worked. And so now it's bringing back some of the old. One of the things that bothers me as the commissioner, and I'm pretty sure that it bothers you too, is the low performance in math. Can we talk a little bit about the math instruction? Because I am not sold that our students don't know mathematical concepts. I'm not sold that if I give a child a math problem, that they can't solve it. What do you think is a hindrance in our children being able to be successful on the mathematical portion of the Smarter Balance Assessment, Dr. Herman?
So one of the things that we did was science of reading for pre-K to third and science of mathematics for 4th to 8th grade.
Okay.
Because we saw a dramatic drop in our 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th, 8th grade scores. But one of the things is that algebra is earlier. If you tell our students 2 times 2 minus 3, they could solve that in a heartbeat. If you tell our students that Sally walked into a shoe store, the original price was $99. However, she paid 75% less and her sales price was this. What is the sales price? That's where they get the hiccup. When they see it in actual context and breaking it down. And that's where the shift happened in terms of instruction now. Because now it's not even about, everybody talks about all the other lattice and this math. That's not it. It's really now that the application in what we're looking at. We're looking at, can these students take all of the concept that we taught them and apply it in a real world concept in a multi-step fashion, which we do every day when we go grocery shopping. We go in and we're
It's
like,
real
oh,
world.
yeah, like we're like, oh, okay, this is $30, but it's 25% off.
Back.
We're doing that in our own minds, but our students now have to put this in application, in process, and that's where the gap comes in.
So I'm glad you said that, and I'll give you an opportunity, Dr. Jurgen, to comment, because in my work with the New Schools projects, I had the opportunity to engage with some schools in Arizona, and a particular school is Westmac, and it's a CTE school, right? And the CTE school is set up in forts, but within each fort, you have an English teacher, a math teacher, all the disciplines, and they use the CTE track that particular student is on to use literature connected to that, mathematical concepts connected to that, so it becomes relevant to what the student wants to become in the future. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect for our children. They don't know why we're doing this math problem. What does it have to do with me becoming an adult? How am I going to use this again? So it's about us helping our teachers to make that connection so that our students also get it and are willing to be receptive to learning a new skill. Your thoughts, Dr.
Commissioner, I think you've hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that it has to be relevant for our students. And when you look in the world of CTE, just recently, it's no secret that I took a carpentry class, right?
Right.
And so I took algebra 30 years ago. But when I was able to sit in the carpentry class, that was my aha moment. That this is what A plus B equals. You know what I mean? That's where I get it.
That's right.
And if you're just in the room and you're just looking at numbers, it just doesn't work. If we look at the fact that our numbers, our scores, for the first time that I have been in this department, have rolled backwards in mathematics, that says to us that while our children were home, no one was helping to teach them that could teach them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. In some areas, we all have learned to read, and so you can work with a child to form these letters and pronounce this in a certain way. But mathematics, a lot of people still have a fear. Growing up, I would hear my mother say, I don't like math. So already, just coming up, I know I can't go to my mom for assistance in math.
Another thing that I think is relevant when we talk about sitting down to take an assessment is the fact that there are many variables that could impact the success of any student. And I reflect on myself. I was never a good test taker. I suffered from anxiety and just anxious. And so it never worked for me. Not that I didn't know the content, I struggled in that area. So even when we are getting ready to sit our students before this assessment, we have to speak to them. We have to talk to them about the importance of doing their best. And we have to find strategies and ways to keep the momentum up. So have you guys planned anything as we're getting ready to approach the testing season in March? Anything from the St. Croix district that is on the horizon to get our students energized and ready to to do their best on the test, Dr. Herman?
So I have to run it by my team, but I have some ideas, whether we're doing a pep rally, whether we're doing a walkathon, following what our sister district did when they had a big walkathon and stuff. But we're going to do something, but the schools are also doing things. Schools are having little hurrahs, and because we're going to have a testing week in St. Croix. And so it's really important for us to also engage the parents from now in the
Yes.
conversation about getting them to school on time. High school they're going to have a different schedule for that week and what that's going to look like. But we really want our students to start to engage. So we're starting a conversation with them about the importance of the test and how it reflects them.
I think that's critical. Anything from you, Dr.
Commissioner, one of
Yoder?
the things I didn't like is when you go school to school, I noticed that there would be a different response when we talk about preparation for the standardized test. Some schools would really make a big deal of how the students scored, and you would celebrate those students. And some schools really didn't have anything going on. And so we just really made it a point to share with all of our schools that all of our children have to be celebrated in this way. And that's going to help them to feel more confident when they go in to take this year's testing cycle. And so just recently, I just got an entire testing plan. And it doesn't just include the pep rally, but I want to know all those little tidbits that whether it's giving them more practice on the computer, whether it's you doing some drills in the schools, whether it's you're using your small groups to impart a particular standard or whatever across the board. But I want to know the entire plan, because the whole throng from me to the principal, we have 6 weeks.
Yes.
And there's something that we can do in that 6 weeks to maximize the benefits that because I will say it as superintendent, I am not satisfied with the scores.
Yep.
Dr. Harmon, I know you will say the same thing. I know you will
do.
say the same thing, Commissioner. But we have to
Absolutely.
place that into context and look at part of our journey, because we've come a long way, I see that since last year when you gave the principals the charge, Commissioner, of sharing the data, I think they took ownership with it from then. And so now that year is going to serve as baseline, I'm looking for results this year.
Oh, me too.
And so am I. And I think that as we begin to grow, the momentum will really increase. And again, we are here to support our people who are in the trenches, and we know that you cannot do it alone. It takes all of us. And so the commitment is there. But student outcomes has to be at the center of what we do. And it's very important that when we are entrusted with children, that we own them as though they're our children. I always say they're mine, because I want every child to have the best possible outcomes. And so we are getting ready to wrap up. It's a quick show, but we'll be back again. Before I wrap up, Superintendent Herman, you have the voice of the district to the public. What would you like to say to them in closing?
First of all, I would like to say thank you for allowing me to serve you and to serve our children. It's really an honor each and every day to get up and lead with my heart first. And so thank you. I ask that you continue to bring your children to school on time so we can increase our attendance. Our goal is 10% this year. And push the fact that this is an opportunity for them to increase themselves. We look at the whole child, and just thank you. And I can't wait to be back.
Awesome. Dr. Jurgen?
Along those same lines, thank you for having me. And I just want to mention that it has truly been an honor, the honor of my life, to serve the St. Thomas St. John District as superintendent. And as we move forward, I'm very proud of some of the things that we've been able to do collectively. The dropout rate is down. The graduation rate is up.
Amen.
Exactly.
And so we have a lot to be thankful for. I'm not satisfied with these scores. And so I'm going after them with a vengeance, because we all need results, right? And that's why we're here. And so, I just look forward to finishing the work that we've started. And I think we have the right people in the right seat to get the job done.
I agree. And so one of the things I would like to say to the community is we don't look at one assessment to evaluate our children.
Correct.
We do not look at one assessment to evaluate anybody's child. And so when we talk about student progress or school progress, we're looking at several different indicators. And we will be back to share what that would look like. But it's time for the shift, and it's time for us to ensure that every single child that enters our doors has a trajectory for success. Whether it's in the school or in the community or at a college, at a university, definitely want to make sure that that trajectory is set. And we've put a lot of things in place to ensure that our teachers have the resources. So one of the things before we end the show is the platforms that we've put in place, and we've made a commitment as a department to meet with the unions, because the American Federation of Teachers is an important union that must be in collaboration with the department, as well as the EAA, which is the Administrators Association. And so we meet monthly because the department may have resources, but they too have resources that we could tap into. So it's not VIDE against the world. It's all the resources coming together to ensure that we are meeting the needs of the whole child. And so, Superintendent Herman, in terms of resources, what do you have that can help a struggling teacher with student engagement?
It is so funny that you said that we tap into our resources, because most recently on our February 5th PD, we partnered with AFT, the local AFT, President Soto Thomas, and the national trainers who came down and actually provided training to every school site on student engagement. They did a virtual training for counselors. So even though each school had trainings that were outlined, school-based, through our partnership with AFT, we're able to put forth student engagement training specifically for our secondary teachers. And that was a great opportunity. So we will continue to do such. And for the upcoming school year, we're going to be training our secondary teachers in the science of core instruction, which focuses on using student engagement strategies to promote any content area.
And we know that the key to changing the outcomes of students is really addressing the core.
Yes.
And so while we love all the interventions we have, we are trying to get to a place where we don't have to use interventions
Correct.
to recoup any learning loss, but to advance our students and their levels in particular disciplines. And so again, I want to thank you guys for taking the time out to be here today. Thank you to the audience for tuning in today. We will be back again next Tuesday at 5:30 here at WTJX 93.1 FM. Please join us. We will have different stakeholders internally from the Virgin Islands Department of Education, just here to give you insight into the work that we do. Our work is not something that we take lightly. We are entrusted with the future of this territory. Therefore, we must always put our students first. So thank you for joining us. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week at the Commissioner's Corner, brought to you by the Virgin Islands Department of Education. Have a blessed evening.